Thank you for watching this video from the Center for European Studies at Carleton University. This project has received funding from the European Union and Carleton University. The views expressed in this video do not reflect those of the European Union or the Center for European Studies.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Cornado for his very kind words that are particularly appreciated above all because they come from him, and I've had the great honor to work with him in New York for more or less 1 year, and it was a great experience. So I'm very happy to see him again, and I thank him again for having thought of me for this event and for his kind words. I also like to thank you all for being here and to thank Carleton University for having me. It's a great honor to be present here today. Without further ado, we will go into the discussion, the EU role at the United Nations, and we will try to see how it adds up after the Lisbon Treaty if the European Union manages by its own coordination and by the instruments that were given by the Lisbon Treaty to actually deliver more than it would do with just the action of the 28 member states. Just a little caveat, the presentation is to have a reference in front of us, a common reference that we can look at. It's not a fancy PowerPoint presentation, so don't expect too much out of it. So what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about 3 blocks, let us say. The first one is the EU Common Foreign and Security Policy after the Lisbon Treaty, to have the basics of what has changed and what are the actors and what are the instruments that we have. And then we will move to the, let us say, the core of the discussion today, the EU at the UN. We will try to see what is the action of the European Union at the UN, but we will also try to see why, at least in my personal opinion, it is of particular relevance to judge the effectiveness of the new instruments put forward by the Lisbon Treaty. And finally, we might try to look a bit beyond and see the role of the External Action Service after Lisbon, and have a first appraisal of what has changed and what has improved and what has not after the Lisbon Treaty. I forgot one important caveat. All that I say today is my personal opinion, so it doesn't involve the EU delegation at the UN, the EEAS, or the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So these are my personal opinion, and I'm going to be very, very frank in putting them forward. So what we are not going to talk about, we are not going to take an academic approach. I'm no expert of European Union affairs. If I'm an expert of anything, I'm an expert of the Middle East peace process. It's a completely different topic. I'm a practitioner, so I'm a national diplomat, and for a European diplomat, European Union coordination, European Union affairs, they're a large part of your business, whatever role you play. So the EU has always been, throughout my career, an important dimension of my work. It is even more so now that I work at the European Union delegation, that I'm, for the time being, a European Union official, and I'm in charge of a part of the coordination with the member states. We are not going also to talk about 2 important elements of the EEAS, but which are not part of my experience. So I have no particular insight to share with you, which is the Common Security and Defense Policy, which is a whole branch of activities of the EEAS, and the Crisis Management Architecture, which lies a little bit in between the Common Foreign and Security Policy and the CSDP. So this is what we are not going to cover today. So let's start from the first point, the EU Common Foreign and Security Policy after the Lisbon Treaty. And here I'm going to contradict myself immediately because we will be a bit academic for the first part, but just to lay the ground of what we are going to discuss today. So we're going to focus on 3 things. The principles. We have to see, we have a common foreign policy. What are the principles of this common foreign policy? The principles are laid down in the treaties. The treaties, they're not a constitution because we try to have a constitution, and the Europeans rejected it in 2 referendums in 2 of our member states. So we don't have a constitution. But as a matter of fact, the treaties are a constitution. The treaties are what tells us where we are going, what are our instruments, what we can and we cannot do. So we will start with in the treaties, we will see that are very clear about laying down the principles for the European Common Foreign and Security Policy. We will then look at the actors and the competencies and the tools and the priorities. So who has to try to achieve these goals and to put in practice this principle, and what tools does he or she have at his disposal. So the principles, we were not going to see all of these into the details, but Article 2, the very start of the Treaty on European Union, lays down the principle also for our common foreign and security policy. Human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights. You will see these elements, which are at the basis not of only of the common and foreign and security policy, but of the whole process of European integration, of building a European house, are also at the basis of the common foreign and security policy. You will see it's a bit, they tend to repeat itself, but it's a process of moving in the treaty from the larger picture to a more precise definition of what a common foreign policy should look at. Article 3.5 lays down the relations of the European Union with the wider world and repeats this element with the addition of peace and security, the sustainable development, and so on. And then moving down, we get to Article 21.1, in which really we get to the definition of the common foreign and security policy, and in which the treaties are very clear in reaffirming that the Union's action on the international scene will be guided by the very same principles that guide the integration and the creation, development, and enlargement of the European Union. And also, it's interesting to note that there is a clear reference to the principles of the UN Charter and international law. This is something I will come back in our second part, because I think, and I'm going to underline that it's interesting to see how many times there is a reference to the UN, and how many times there is a reference to the UN Charter in the Treaty on the European Union. So here we can focus a little bit more, because in this process of narrowing down from the very general principle to actually what is an actionable program, Article 21.2 put forward an effective program for a common foreign and security policy. Safeguard its values, fundamental interests, security, independence and integrity, democracy, rule of law, human rights, international law, peace and international security, sustainable economic, social and environmental development, eradicating poverty, international trade, environment, assisting population in coping with disasters, and very important for us again, promoting international system based on a stronger multilateral cooperation and good global governance. What is interesting about Article 21.2 is that it lays down a very broad program. Basically, I would say if I were to define a program for my own country, Italy, I would say this is a good program. This is a program that is basically the program of every important actor that shares the values that are the European values in the world. It's a program, let us say, for a proper foreign policy, not just for the foreign policy of an international organization. It is what foreign policy is mostly about. Preserving the interest, fostering the interest, peace and security, development, cooperation with the rest of the world. It is an extremely wide and also ambitious program. I mean, I would say it's difficult on the basis of Article 21.2 to say that something is not in the scope of the common foreign and security policy of the European Union. It would be a difficult point to argue. So another element that we have to consider is that the common foreign and security policy remains different from the rest. It's not like, just to make an example, the single market. It remains, even though the pillar system that was before Lisbon Treaty has been abandoned, so it's a common foreign security policy, is a full part of the European Union in integration, but it remains different. It remains different because it has to do with one of the core elements of sovereignty, that's foreign policy. We have 21 member states, and they are fully in charge of their own foreign policy. So the moment we put that together, we put that sovereignty together, it still remains different, and the difference is clearly set out in the treaty. And you can see two elements that immediately tells you that common foreign security policy remains different, and that's that decisions have to be taken in general by consensus, unanimously, and that there's no competence of the European Court of Justice. It's not that the Commission will bring one member state to the Court of Justice in a matter of common and foreign security policy. So, having laid down, and I've gone through it quite quickly because I don't think these are the main points of today's discussion, but we need to have this common basis on which we can build our argument. We can look at the actors and the competencies of the actors in the common foreign security policy. There is the European Council. The European Council is the meeting of all the head of governments and the head of states of the European Union, so of the national leaders of the European Union, with the President of the European Council. That's one of the big new elements of the Treaty of Lisbon. There is no more a rotating presidency. There is a person who is appointed by the European Council for 2.5 years and can be renewed once. It is Herman Van Rompuy, and he will be the present Prime Minister of Poland, Tusk. The European Council identifies the strategic interest. It lays down the main objectives of the common foreign security policy. The President has a role. It is foreseen in the treaty, shall, at his level and in that capacity, ensure the external representation of the Union on issues of concerning its common security and foreign policy. That means, in very practical terms, Herman Van Rompuy came for the summit with Canada just a few days ago. Herman Van Rompuy has been delivering the statement on behalf of the European Union at the General Debate of the United Nations in the past years. So, at his level, which we can compare, even though it's, it wouldn't stand from a legal ground, but we can compare in practice to make it understandable to the level of a head of state. The President of the European Council plays a role. The Council of the European Union, that's the gathering of the ministers, and the Council of the European Union frames the common foreign and security policy and takes the decision needed for its implementation. So, given the strategic objectives and guidelines of the European Council, the Council of the European Union, so the foreign minister, in this case the Foreign Affairs Council, takes the practical decision in the actual circumstances. And those are usually what we call the Council conclusions, which lay down the agreed framework of European Union policy towards a particular issue or a particular situation. The member states, we must not forget that the member states have a key role in the implementation of the common foreign security policy. They're actually an actor to foster the common foreign security policy. We shall not consider that only something that the European Union puts forward, because it would be a great mistake, and it's clearly spelled out in the treaty. They implement the common foreign security policy together with the High Representative Vice President. The Commission, of course, continues to have an important role to play in all that used to be called external action. It is still there. It was all the action with the wider world that doesn't fall under the common foreign and security policies. Examples, trade, development aid, humanitarian assistance, enlargement, neighborhood policy. These are extremely important tools, and the Commission remains in charge of that. And of course, the President of the Commission, not only the Commissioners with the responsibility over these portfolios, continue to be an important actor at the international level. Another example, he was here together with Herman Van Rompuy in the summit with Canada, together with the President of the European Council, represents the European Union at the G7, and he also attends every year the United Nations Ministerial Week. Doesn't deliver the EU statement, but usually he is the actor delivering the EU statement in the summit that take place before the general debate and that are focused on some concrete issues that most of the times fall under the responsibility of the Commission. For instance, climate change this year. The Parliament, which is consulted, so the High Representative reports to the Parliament, and there are debates, and the High Representative should take into consideration the opinion expressed by the Parliament. And finally, I skipped it because it's the most important for us, and I kept it for last, the High Representative Vice President. The High Representative, Article 27, defines the responsibility of the High Representative, shall chair the Foreign Affairs Council, shall contribute through his proposals, so has this capacity of putting forward proposals, to the development of common foreign and security policy, and shall ensure the implementation of the decisions that are taken. And shall have representation, so the capacity of bringing outside the Union the positions of the Union. And also it is clearly said, shall express the Union's position in international organizations and international conferences. Now, summing that up, what are the roles of the High Representative? The High Representative basically plays the role that were played before the Lisbon Treaty by three different persons. Is the High Representative, so he's in charge of the common foreign and security policy on a mandate that comes from the European Council. So the High Representative is confirmed as a commissioner by the Parliament, together with the whole Commission, will have to resign, if asked to resign by the President of the Commission. So it's a commissioner, but it has also a separate mandate that comes directly from the Council, which is the institution responsible for the common foreign and security policy, as a High Representative. But he's also the Vice President of the Commission, so he's in charge of a coordinating role with all that has to do with external action, and to cover the structure that used to be under the responsibility of the Commission, of the Commissioner for External Action, the last one being Benita Ferrero-Waldner, and then is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Council. So plays the role that used to be played by the foreign minister of the rotating presidency. Three roles. A very clear example, for instance, G7 foreign affairs, the G7 every year has a foreign affairs lunch. We used to be there with three people at the foreign affairs. We would have the High Representative Solana, we would have the Commissioner, and if the rotating presidency was not already a member of the G7, we would have the foreign minister of that country. Now we have only one person, that's the High Representative. Key new developments. What have we achieved by this reform? In my opinion, we have achieved two things. And I think generally people look at the first and don't look at the second. And the second, in my opinion, is probably more important than the first, has probably also been more successful than the first so far. The Lisbon Treaty has ensured coherence between the common foreign and security policy and external action by unifying the position of the High Representative and the Vice President. But it has also created, through the presidency function, basically a permanent presidency. We don't have a presidency that changes every 6 months with new priorities, new people, new outlook. We have a structure that is a permanent presidency through the presidency of the Foreign Affairs Council, but also of all the intermediate bodies that go at the technical level and that prepare from the bottom up all the decisions that are taken by the foreign minister. That means the Political and Security Committee in Brussels, where ambassadors sits and meets at least twice a week, but also the working group on specific subject, the working group on human rights, the working group on the Middle East, the working group on Eastern Europe. All these are made of colleagues, of experts. They meet constantly in Brussels, and they're all chaired by somebody who's appointed by the High Representative and represent the High Representative. Also, locally, as it was explained before, the EU delegation has this presidency role, so ensures the local coordination of all EU member states. Tools. The main tool that has been created for this new responsibility is the European External Action Service. The European External Action Service, Article 27.3, is made up of European officials and national diplomats. At least the treaty is very clear about that. At least 2/3 of the officials of the External Action Service will have to be European officials. generally coming from what used to be from the Council Secretariat and from the Commission, but now it's been open, so also from other institutions. For instance, now officials from the Parliament can apply to positions in the External Action Service, and 1/3 has to be made of national diplomats. The EEAS, the External Action Service, is a fully autonomous body of the EU. That means it's neither an institution like the Commission, the Council, the European Council, nor part of the Commission. So it is separate. It's under the authority of the High Representative and is made up of a central administration, headquarters, and the 140 delegations around the world in third countries and international organizations. It is, as a matter of fact, a diplomatic service. It is organized as a diplomatic service. It is building a culture as a diplomatic service. It cannot be called a diplomatic service, but it is for all practical purposes. The EEAS supports the High Representative in her 3 capacities. So supports her as High Representative, but also in ensuring the coordination with the other commissioners and through this system that I've already explained of chairs of all the committees in a role as chair of the Foreign Affairs Council. Assists, as all diplomatic services do, is also in charge of assisting the other actors who have international responsibilities in implementing these responsibilities. So the EEAS is in charge of supporting the President of the European Council and the President of the Commission in their international tasks. And shall support, and this is very important, shall support and work in cooperation with all the other actors that have a role to play. So shall work together with the Commission, shall work together with the Council, and shall work together in the Member States in the implementation of the agreed lines. What are the priorities? The priorities have changed a little bit. At the beginning, one priority was establishing the service, which was an enormous task. It's true, it was not built in a vacuum. We had the Director General for External Relations, but it was something that was uncomparable. It was much smaller than what the EEAS is. To get such an institution up and running in only a couple of years has been quite a success. It's not that I'm not here to argue that the EEAS is perfect. It is not. It will not be for a long time. Nobody can be perfect, but it has still room to improve. But what has been achieved in a couple of years is impressive. And so this is a priority that has changed. If one looked at the beginning of the priorities that had been defined, there was also establishing strategic partnership with those members of the international community that were regarded as strategic partners, and this is not in the priorities that were put forward in 2013. We will discuss more about that. But these are the 3 priorities that were put forward in the review of the External Action Service in 2014. The neighborhood, where the EU can play an active role, meaning the neighborhood for enlargement, so the candidate and potential candidates for membership of the European Union, but also meaning the Eastern Partnership and the Mediterranean. This is the only priority that remained from the original 3. The comprehensive approach, which basically means that the European Union and the common foreign security policy should be able to address any issue that raises at any time, and the focus on those international global issues in which only the joint weight of the member states can really make a difference, on which a single member state doesn't have the clout to really be effective. So we get to the end of the first part, and the question we can ask is, so what's new after Lisbon? What's changed? What's important of the new elements after Lisbon? And I propose 3 elements. This is my opinion. We can debate it. We have a more ambitious agenda than before. We have a more coherent decision-making process, and we have better and more integrated tools. I think we have seen it through the presentation. I shouldn't go into details. More ambitious agenda, we have seen the scope of the common foreign security policy is certainly larger than it used to be and more ambitious. The decision-making process has been made more coherent by unifying a number of functions into the role of the High Representative and by establishing a permanent presidency. And we have better and more integrated tools through this same process and through the creation of the External Action Service, which is something that has made a complete difference in the way the European Union could address these policies. So let's move to the core of our discussion today, which is the EU at the UN, and also why this is, in my opinion, a particularly relevant forum to evaluate and to appraise the EEAS after a few years from its adoption. So we will see three elements here. We will ask ourselves, first of all, why it is important. We will then see the UN in action in two completely different settings, the General Assembly and the Security Council. Those are two completely different worlds. And so the action and the role of the European Union has to be completely different in the two fora. Why is it crucial? Why is it important? Again, in my opinion, it is important because the EU and the UN have shared goals and shared values. We are built to pursue, in part, of course, the European Union has a different agenda and a different, more ambitious goal at the regional level, but they are built on shared values. Secondly, because the European Union and the United Nations are partners. The European Union is not just an actor, it's not just like a state, a member of the UN putting forward its own agenda. It is that, I mean, not a state, but it puts forward the agenda that is agreed with all the member states of the European Union, but it is also a concrete partner of the United Nations, which enables the United Nations to perform and to implement its tasks. The United Nations wouldn't be the same without the cooperation of the European Union. Very senior UN official, I will not say who he or she is, because I don't think he meant this to be quoted, but it's, I think, an interesting sentence said recently, the European Union is our main partner, the African Union is our main customer. And this, I think, it's quite a good insight of what the European Union is at the United Nations. And then finally, it is particularly important because the challenge for the common foreign security policy in all its activities, in all its settings, is to speak with one voice. It is meant for Europe to speak with one voice. And we will see that this is particularly relevant and particularly important and particularly challenging at the UN. So shared values and goals. We have already seen this. The Union shall promote multilateral solutions to common problems, in particular in the framework of the United Nations. We say it clearly. We state it in the treaty. The UN is extremely important for the EU. And the UN or the UN charters are mentioned in a number of articles. I put them here. There are 5 articles. It is quite something that an international organization in its treaty, in its basic charter, mentions another international organization 5 times. Chapter 8 of the UN Charter, regional arrangements. Probably if I ask somebody in the street, I mean, what's the role of the European Union vis-à-vis the United Nations? The first thing one would think is, well, the United Nations has Chapter 8, regional organization. It is, of course, important. The EU has acted and acts as a regional organization for the purpose of international peace and security. We can think of Bosnia. We can think of Kosovo. In my opinion, it's not the most important thing today. In my opinion, the European Union has much more to provide to the United Nations outside the framework of Chapter 8. And why? Because look at Article 1 instead of Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. Article 1 sets out, like we saw for the articles in the European Union Treaty, sets out what is the UN about. What is the UN about? International peace and security, friendly relations among nations, international cooperation in the economic, social, cultural, humanitarian fields, human rights. I think we've seen something like that before. It is the UN and the European Union are built on the same values and to foster the same goals in the international community. Also, we have seen these slides before too. What are the priorities of the European Union? If we look at the priorities, all 3 priorities need the European Union to be active in the United Nations to achieve them. The neighborhood, we have talked about Kosovo, we have talked about Bosnia, but we could talk about Ukraine, we could talk about Libya, we could talk about Syria. The neighborhood is constantly on the UN agenda, and in particular on the agenda of the Security Council. The comprehensive approach, the United Nations is about as a comprehensive approach. Every global issue that raises is going to be discussed at the United Nations. So you can't have a comprehensive approach if you don't put it forward at the United Nations. And finally, the global issues, be it climate change, be it post-2015 development, be it the Ebola crisis. All those are discussed at the United Nations. So also for the priorities, not just for the shared values, the United Nations is a crucial, central forum for the European Union Common Foreign and Security Policy. But also, we discussed about the partnership. Partnership is in numbers. I give you here a few numbers. The European Union member states, of course, the European Union is not a member of the United Nations, so like that, it doesn't pay into the budget of the United Nations. But the EU member states pay 35% of the UN regular budget, 36.8% of the peacekeeping. About 1/2 of all development, of all contribution to UN funds and program, and the European Commission alone. So we're just talking about the European Union budget, contributes for more than $1.5 billion in support of UN external assistance. This is a measure of the partnership. But the partnership goes beyond the money. Of course, when one thinks about the European Union, always thinks about the money, but it goes way beyond the money. There is a constant consultation in the political affairs. People from Brussels travels constantly to New York to consult with the Secretariat, and the same, it's true for the UN. Our leadership is constantly in touch with the leadership of the UN. This is even more true in the peacekeeping, where it is formalized in a steering committee that meets every year and discuss how the European Union can contribute to the peacekeeping. It is usually not through peacekeepers. This is more of a national thing, and European Union member states on the whole are still a bit lagging behind on providing troops. It might change in the next year, but it is through financial support outside the peacekeeping budget. For instance, AMISOM in Somalia is basically financed by the European Union, but also through cooperation with our CSDP missions, stabilization mission, contribution in security sector reform. So there is a strong partnership in peacekeeping that is really a systematic one between the UN Secretariat, the Department of Peacekeeping Operation, and the EEAS. Peace building, the EU is one of the main actors in the peace building and is a member of the Peacebuilding Commission, a member as EU, so as institution, not in representation of the member states. In development, we have seen, and of course, the contribution of the European Union to all the development discussion is an extremely important one. Humanitarian affairs, the cooperation between OCHA and ECO is an extremely strong one. So not only the European Union is one of the most important humanitarian donors, the most important if we put together also the member states, but it also a partner. There is a partnership between the two structures, OCHA and ECO. And in the fostering of human rights, we are probably, as the European Union, the strongest force in the world in promoting respect of human rights and protection of human rights. And this is a goal of the United Nations. Speaking with one voice. We have already seen Article 27. This is the basic in the treaty. The High Representative shall express the Union's position in international organization and international conferences. This is the basic principle. If there is an international organization, if there is an international conference, the EU voice is put forward by the High Representative, and therefore by the EU delegation, because the High Representative, of course, is not constantly in New York, so at the working level, by the EU delegation. Speaking with one voice, if we go beyond the treaty, is important, is an interest, in my opinion, not only for the European Union, but for the member states. And we should try to say why it is so. I'm putting forward ideas because then I think we'll have an interactive discussion. So you can always call me back and try to debate and say, I got something totally wrong. But this is my opinion, why it is important to speak with one voice at the United Nations. Because European integration means shared values, shared interests, and shared goals. It's not that we have just to, painstakingly negotiate something that is a compromise in which somebody gives something and somebody else gives something else, and then defend that as better as we can in the UN. I think it's much more than that. I think there is a reality that is brought forward by the European integration, which is a reality of shared interest by all the 28 and shared goals. And the best way to put forward that is through coordination and through having the EU speaking with one voice. It's also because individual priorities can be leveraged in a global approach. It is an interest for member states, because if I am a member state and I have a particular interest on one topic, and maybe not so much in another topic, it can be magnified in a global approach of the European Union. While if I were on my own, I wouldn't have the same weight and the same clout when I put it forward. This is evident. I don't know, there is a member state that, of course, for instance, Lithuania. Let's get the example of Lithuania, which is now a Security Council member and so has an exceptional clout for 2 years. But Lithuania, of course, if you set their priorities, the situation in Ukraine is like the first 10 priorities by itself. By having a say in the way the European Union policy is framed, Lithuania will magnify its clout on this topic. And so will put forward its own interest in a much more effective way. And the contribution, this is an interesting element also, is that the contribution of different outlook to the world, different interests, different sensitivities that are given by tradition, by history, by geography of the member states really create a global approach, because the single member states will make sure that the EU is active in fields in which maybe other member states wouldn't be as active. And finally, because size matters. We are 28 member states, 500 million people, $70 trillion GDP, the largest GDP in the world if we take us together, larger than the United States. If you compare, I didn't put a chart in, but if you go and you compare, take Germany. Germany is by far the biggest member of the European Union, but still in today's world, it's dwarfed by China. It's still smaller than Japan. With Brazil growing up, with India growing up, simply the European Union member states do not have the same weight, do not have the same clout that they used to have. And that will be even more so in the future. But if you put us together, then it's a completely different picture. Also, size matters at the UN. I mean, now we were talking about the international community, much larger historical processes. But then if we go to the day-to-day business, size matters also at the UN. We are a big bloc. We can be a big bloc because we're not just 28 member states. We are 6 candidate countries, 1 potential candidate, 3 European Free Trade Area countries, 5 Eastern Partnership countries, even though it's fair to say that Azerbaijan doesn't have a perfect record of aligning with the EU, 3 European Union microstates. If you put all together, that's 46 countries, 46 member states of the European Union, of the United Nations, and so almost a fourth of the UN membership. So when the EU moves, it doesn't just move itself, it moves a larger bloc. And sometimes we can go also beyond that, because you have the like-minded that will coordinate with the EU, or that on some instances in which they don't have a particular interest will just follow the EU, or will contribute with the EU to shape something. And I made here the example of the so-called JUSCANs, which is an informal group of Japan, US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. You can add South Korea to that. You can add some Latin Americans to that in some cases. It means that if we move as a bloc at the United Nations, we can bring together a very large part of the membership. So, having convinced you, hopefully, that the UN is a particularly crucial place for the EU to play out its common foreign and security policy, let's see what we do in practice. The General Assembly. Here, the treaty is very clear. The member states shall coordinate. So the member states have an obligation, It's not that they can choose to coordinate or not to coordinate on General Assembly issues. They have to. Then, I mean, in the rare case in which member states do not reach an agreement on a common position, they are free to pursue their national policies. But first, they have to try to coordinate. So we cannot really argue, but this is a matter that doesn't fall under coordination. If it is in the GA, then it has to be coordinated. And who's responsible for that coordination? Also here, the treaty is very clear. The High Representative shall organize the coordination, and therefore the EU delegation in New York. So going back to the question, why the UN is crucial, is because this coordination is not easy, of course. It's a very intensive process, and because unity is on the line every day. There is no hiding at the UN. I mean, and here, I mean, the colleagues in the Italian embassy may correct me, but it's much easier to hide in a bilateral setting because there is more intense, bilateral relations. The focus is on the bilateral relations. Then you have to put together vis-a-vis the host country some position, but it's not an everyday job. You can also, have nuanced approach. At the UN, you're called, to the open every day. There is a vote, either you vote together or you don't. There is a statement, either you agree on a statement and you deliver it, or you don't speak. There is a negotiation, either you have a common position and the EU delegation negotiate on behalf of everybody, or the member states are on their own. So if you fail to speak with a single voice, it is seen. There's no hiding. Some numbers. In 2013, there was 1,313 coordination meetings at the EU delegation. That is quite something. I calculated it's an average of 5 meetings a day. It's more than that, actually. I just took out the Saturdays and the Sundays to get to 5. But if you take out August, you take out the holidays and so on, it's much more than that. The reality is when the GA substantive session is ongoing, you might end up having 12 coordination meetings a day, 15 coordination meetings a day. They are at all levels. You have meetings of the heads of mission, of the deputy head of mission, of the sectoral experts. When I was at the Italian mission and I was working as a human rights expert, I was joking that during the third committee, I saw more my colleagues in coordination than my own wife. I mean, I was telling that as a joke, but it was a reality. The coordination, EU coordination, is an incredible exercise. And it's managed by the European Union delegation. From September 1st, 2013 to September 1st, 2014, 218 statements were made. And each single statement has to be negotiated. The European Union delegation cannot stand up and say something. Every time we speak in an official statement, we have to have the statement agreed word by word. And in 2013, the EU was united 92% of the time. And even this is a bit little because in reality, the level of union is higher if you take out disarmament, in which there are a number of resolutions in which we are historically divided, and for a very simple reasons. We have neutral countries that are very attached to the idea of global nuclear disarmament, and we have 2 nuclear powers in the European Union. So we managed, for instance, yesterday to deliver a statement, so to have them to agree, but still it is something that is not easy. But there are also a whole legacy of useless resolution, if I might say so, that comes from the past, for instance, on decolonization, that are just, that have nothing to do with the real world out there, in which we have a record of split vote, that nobody changes, nobody has an interest to change, but that impact on the number, on the figure there. The reality is that most of the times we are united. And the EU has changed, we have seen, with the Lisbon Treaty, And we needed to reflect that at the European Union. Now, if the European Union delegation is to speak on behalf of the European Union, it would need rights and privileges that were not available when the European Union was just an observer organization like all the other observer organizations. So what we needed was a resolution to enhance the status of the European Union. The resolution was adopted on 3rd May 2011, after it failed the first time. We will see that after. And it gives a number of additional privileges. The most important are that the European Union can talk together with the major groups. How does it work at the UN? First, the major groups speak. So African Group, African Union, Non-Aligned Movement, G77. It depends on CARICOM. So it depends on the setting, on the statement. There are different groups that are involved. And in all these cases, it's a member state. It's not that, for instance, for the Arab group, or even for the Africans, it's not the African Union observer or the League of Arab States observers that speak. It's the rotating presidency of that group. So the major groups speak first, then the member states, and then the observers. If we hadn't changed the status of the EU, then the effect would have been that the EU would always been the last to speak in all the debates. Now we speak among the major groups, even though the major groups insist, most of the major groups insist, that we have to speak last among the major groups because we are not a member state. We don't accept this argument, and there is a big fight not a really big fight, but there is, let us say, a fuss every year. In the end, we don't accept the argument, but we don't go in an active fight, and we accept to speak last without accepting the principle. And then usually, actually Canada or New Zealand or Australia come to our rescue and accept to have us speak before Cannes at least one time. So there's no precedent that we speak last. Also, the European Union speaks in the general debate. The general debate, you have all the member states of the United Nations who speak during the ministerial week, head of state, head of government, minister of foreign affairs. It's the most solemn moment of the United Nations. You also have the Holy See and Palestine that are non-member state observers, and now you also have the European Union. So this statement on behalf of the European Union is delivered by the President of the European Union Council. And then there are other things that are more technical. Also, one thing, but let's move to this slide before I go into these other details. Because Resolution 65 276 is interesting in my opinion, not just because it was needed, otherwise we wouldn't be able to do what we do at the United Nations, but because it tells us two things. It shows us that there is a resistance to the new role of the European Union, in part because it is misunderstood. Member states, above all small member states, small islands, Caribbean islands, and of course good friends of the European Union like Zimbabwe, Syria, and others are opposed to this because they denounce, they say the United Nations is a state organization. It's made up of states. We don't want other entities, other structure to have a full membership. We don't want full membership. We just made an argument that the member states of the European Union pooled sovereignty and decided that there would be the European Union speaking on their behalf, and this has to be reflected in the reality. When other member states in other regions get to that level of integration, they will have all the support of the European Union in having the same rights. But there is a strong resistance that actually failed the first attempt because there was a no-action motion, so to move the debate to the following session, and it actually won. Which was quite a failure for us, also because it was supported by a lot of countries that are actually receiving a lot of support and aid from the European Union. But also, it is interesting because it shows, and this will be a bit of a leitmotif of my presentation from now on, that the reality of our new role makes for a successful, incremental, and pragmatic approach. You have to be pragmatic. You have to move little by little, slowly, based on the reality of the facts. The EU had this responsibility. It was untenable, it was unsustainable that the EU would not be given at the United Nations the instruments to just play the role it had to play. By being pragmatic, you can succeed. The resolution, if you go and read a lot of papers that were published or articles that were published, even from scholars after the adoption of this resolution, a lot of them said it's a failure. It will not give the European Union the tools that it needs for the function it has under the Lisbon Treaty. That's because it was a maximalist approach. It's not true. It gave us the tools. We are negotiating on behalf of the European Union on every single resolution that is discussed in the GA. And we are talking about the groups, and we are able to deliver the voice. You should not focus always on the details. You have to be pragmatic. And the funny thing, we now sit in a special position. These are things that are of no effect, but they have a symbolic value. When we were given this status, it was there was still the old GA that had not been refurbished. There's been a capital master plan. The whole compound of the United Nations has been completely refurbished. And we were sitting among the international organization in alphabetical order between the, I don't remember, the Commonwealth and somebody else on the sides of the whole. Then, by a decision of the Secretariat, that in my opinion has no legal basis in the resolution, an enhanced status was recognized, and we were put after Palestine, so after the last of the non-member states, and before the African Union, the first of the observer international organization outside the alphabetic order. And now we are given 6 seats in the GA, in the new GA. The refurbishing of the GA is finished. There is a new GA, and we discovered that we have 6 seats. The fact that we were supposed to have 6 seats, like a member state, was one of the things that we had to take out of the resolution to get it adopted, because it was symbolic and it was rejected by a lot of small countries. We did not insist on it, but it came as a reality of the role that we play. Now, the African Union always has somebody sitting in one of our seats to prove that we don't have 6 seats, but they were not going to keep it up. But I mean, this can make you laugh and can be, something of not great importance, but it shows that you have to be pragmatic, and the reality of your role will impose itself. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. For instance, we were admitted in the management committee of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. We're one of the biggest funders, so we say we want to be a member of the management committee that oversees how this money is spent. And the membership of the management committee is quite friendly to the European Union, and we managed to get that, even though in theory that is reserved to member states. There was for 1 year and a half, nobody wanted to chair the country-specific configuration of the Peacebuilding Commission on the Central African Republic, because it's a headache. After 1 year and a half, we say, but if nobody wants, we are ready to do that, also because we are one of the 3, together with France and the United States, of the 3, let us say, state entities that have an office in Bangui. So maybe it's going to be easier for us. That we lost because Russia completely opposed us, because it was a step too far in expanding our role. But through the pragmatic approach, you can actually establish yourself. This I put just to show you what are our priorities. I don't think it's particularly relevant for the discussion and for the argument I'm developing today, but these are the priorities that have been defined for this session of the GA. What is interesting is that up until the recent past, if I had to put a slide with the priorities of the EU for the GA session, you wouldn't have been able to read it. I would have probably had to use like character, number 6 or something like that, because you would have 120 priorities. Now we have been able to narrow them down to 5, which is another sign of maturity in our common foreign and security policy. These are examples. I think I'm being maybe a bit long, so I'll leave them for the more for the interactive session. But these are interesting examples of our action in the GA. First one, maybe I'll talk it a bit more. These growth pains, I call them, and the first one is the statement war, I called it. For a number of months after Lisbon, we were unable to speak, not because Russia or Zimbabwe or CARICOM opposed us our right to speak, but because we were unable to agree on the statements, because one member state, and I think it's easy to guess which, argued that the European Union had no competence in a number of topics, and so could not speak on those topics. It was a big headache because the European Union voice disappeared from the United Nations all of a sudden. In the end, it was solved, also proof of how we manage our divisions and we can be constructive. And now the European Union, before every statement, has to decide if it's speaking on behalf of the European Union, that is on topic in which it has a clear competence under the common foreign and security policy. For instance, we're making a statement on the Middle East peace process. There are a number of conclusions, tens of conclusions on the Middle East peace process that have been adopted by the Foreign Affairs Council. So we clearly have competence. So we speak on behalf of the European Union. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, when the statement addresses things that are in part under the competence of the European Union, but in part under the sole competence of the member states. For instance, if we talk about UNRWA, the Agency for the Palestinian Refugees, where we contribute from the EU budget, but also the budget of the member states, then we speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. And then on behalf of the member states, if the member states agree that they will be represented by the European Union, even though the European Union has no competence. And the interesting element that shows how we have moved in the past couple of years is that the European Union delegation in New York is now in charge of the coordination of the EU on all matters of Fifth Committee. The Fifth Committee is the committee that decides on budgetary questions, that decides how the UN spends its budget. The European Union has no competence whatsoever on that because the money comes from the member states. But the member states have decided that they would be more effective if they were represented by the single voice of the European Union in a coordination managed by the European Union delegation. And so from not being able to speak, we are now actually managing a thing on which we have no competence. And the interesting element is that who has proposed this arrangement? The very same member state that opposed the statements at the beginning. Those are other possible topics on which we can talk on managing division, and I put the two issues, Palestinian question and sexual health and reproductive rights, or successful example of the EU in action, but we don't have time, I think, to enter that, but I'm happy to answer some questions. Moving to the Security Council. The Security Council, as I said at the beginning, it's a completely different forum. It's a completely different beast than the GA. And you see that immediately in the treaty. Why? Because we do not coordinate. We concert. And then there is an obligation to keep the EEAS and the other member states informed from those that sit there. This means that the European Union does not coordinate. We discuss matters dealing with the Security Council. We discuss that in HOMS meeting, in meetings of heads of mission, and the regular meetings of the political coordinators, so the people in charge of the Security Council in all the missions. And then there is a clear caveat, without prejudice to their responsibility under the provision of the United Nations Charter. That means we have two permanent members that have special responsibility, and their special responsibility are not affected by the Lisbon Treaty. Okay, when we talk about the Security Council, we should have a European Union seat at the Security Council. Yes, we should probably. It would make sense, except that we probably wouldn't have the tools right now to be an effective permanent member of the Security Council for the way it works and the way we have to coordinate our positions. But yes, personal opinion, I'm also Italian, so yes, we should have. But it's not in the cards. It's simply not in the cards. To reform the Security Council, you would need not only 2/3 majority in the GA, but you would also need the 5 permanent members of the Security Council to ratify the change. So you would need France and UK to commit suicide, and you would need Russia and China to accept the European Union as a permanent member. So yes, we should, but we won't. And then a little provocation: the permanent members, are they a curse or are they a blessing? Both. They're a curse because they're the big limit to European Union action in the Security Council, because they're very jealous of their prerogatives, and because they're very orthodox in the way we have to behave in the Security Council. So, for instance, you see that things happen in other groups that don't have the level of integration that we have, that go sometimes further than we do in the European Union. But at the same time, they're a blessing because they're good Europeans. And that means that they have worked honestly to increase our room in the Security Council, and when they do share, the level of information that they have and the level of understanding that they have of the Security Council is completely uncomparable with everybody else. Basically, the Security Council is really depending on France and the UK. They are really the ones that push the agenda of the Security Council forward. And having them as European Council members, when they open up, is an incredible advantage. They don't always do that, but when they do, it's extremely important for us. The reality of the European Union new role makes for a successful incremental and pragmatic approach. You have already heard this sentence. It works also in the Security Council. How have we developed a pragmatic approach? We have done a number of concrete practical things that have expanded our role in the Security Council, and have made something that is completely different on a qualitative level from what the former presidency were able to do. We have regular so-called Article 34 meetings. We have seen Article 34 is the one that speaks about Security Council, puts an obligation of information. So every week we have a meeting in which one of the members of the Security Council informs all the other of what's going on in the Security Council. But we have gone beyond that. We used to have it even before the Lisbon Treaty, because it was before Article 19. It was not much different. We now have informal briefings after every closed meetings of the Security Council. After every closed meeting of the Security Council, an expert from one of the European Council members comes out. All the other experts are outside waiting for him, and he will tell them what happened in the closed meeting. This is not in the treaty. This has been established as a practice. Some resistance at the beginning. You can imagine from whom? From the permanent members. But now, actually, the permanent members, they're by far the best briefers when we come to that. There's also practice, a relatively recent new practice. The Security Council, the European Union members that are members of the Security Council, 4 now, Lithuania, Luxembourg, and the 2 permanent. Luxembourg will exit the Security Council this year, and Spain is a candidate, but we also have New Zealand and Turkey, so it depends. We might have a 4th or we might not. Regularly, they meet at luncheons and they discuss the agenda of the Security Council, quite a further looking discussion, quite a strategic one. The interesting thing is the EU is invited to that. So we are the only ones there that are not members of the Security Council. And information sharing. We have started sharing all our cables, and we have our structure in Brussels prepare briefing before every meeting of the Security Council for our elected members. Imagine if you are Luxembourg with an extremely limited diplomatic network and with extremely limited human resources. What a change it makes that you got the support of a network of 130 delegations in the world. They get the cables from every single situation on the agenda of the Security Council before the meeting. And that, naturally, we put them even more to put forward a European agenda, even though they don't say that. But it will be a European agenda. And they've come to rely on us incredibly. Lobbying and démarche. The European Union, through the work, for instance, in the 3rd committee that deals with human rights, has created a machinery to go out in the world, both in New York and in the capitals, making lobbying, making demarches to steer, to convince people to vote in a certain way, to take a certain initiative. This well-oiled machine has now been put also at work in the Security Council. For instance, Ukraine. We had a Security Council resolution that was vetoed by Russia. We had a strong machine that went out to gather support outside the Security Council for that resolution, symbolic support. Or another resolution vetoed by Russia and China on referring the situation in Syria to the ICC. It had, I don't remember the exact number of co-sponsorship, but it had a vast majority of the membership of the UN co-sponsoring it, thanks to the lobby mechanism that we put at work. And then we are really working towards a single point of contact. We have to thank our Security Council members, permanent and elected, because the level of sharing that they have with the European Union delegation is much more than they would have with every single member of the European Union. Also, for a matter, I was in the Security Council. I was part of the Italian mission when we were in the Security Council. I could not speak with 28 people at the same time. It is part of my job to speak with 28 people. And now, and sometimes we really become the single point of contact. Information is given to us, and we put it to the member states. But also the external people. Sometimes, even if it's a Security Council business, they come to us in the meetings. And then there is the reality of the role of the EU in peace and security. We saw before as the EU is a partner of the UN in peacekeeping, in political affairs. This has been shown by how much we speak in the Security Council, and nobody is opposing that. The High Representative is briefing regularly the Security Council. Lady Ashton has come to the Security Council 4 times during her mandate, every year with the exception of one. And the new High Representative will probably brief the Council very soon after the beginning of her mandate. And in 2013, the EU delivered 27 statements in the Security Council. On the basis of Article 39 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure, which says that the Security Council can invite personalities to give on the basis of their competence, because we are not a member state, so we cannot be invited. But the reality, also their pragmatic approach, we are there under Rule 39, but even though it's not European Union, but it's Ambassador Thomas Meyer-Harting, who's the head of delegation in the list of speakers, if it's not him, because he can't, and it's the deputy or somebody else, nobody is saying that this other person cannot, which is not the case in the cases of other personalities. If it's a personality that is invited and cannot go, nobody else can replace him or her. And also we have the nameplate. It's not Mr. Thomas Meyer-Harting, it's European Union. 27 is quite a number of statements, because in the debate, basically you can speak only in the open debates that are open to non-council members, or if you're an involved party, like for instance on Afghanistan, on Haiti, on a number of issues, we are invited as an involved party, but otherwise you can't speak in most of Security Council debates. So it's quite a number. Another interesting element is that the last time in February, it was Valentine's Day, 14th of February this year, the last time that the High Representative came to brief the Council actually adopted a presidential statement that is a formal outcome of the Council on the topic of the cooperation between the EU and the UN. And I have put here all the situation issues on the Council agenda that are mentioned in that PRST, in that presidential statement. That is impressive. These are all the elements in which the Security Council, including Russia, including China, say that the EU plays a constructive role. It's basically everything. And then, even with that impressive number of issues, there are others that were not mentioned in the PRST, but in which the EU is formally mentioned in resolution dealing with that. starting from the Ebola crisis, Libya, and Guinea-Bissau and Haiti. Leaving also that aside, the EU plays a role, even though it's not mentioned, in another number of issues that are on the Council agenda. Basically, I would say 95% of the elements, of the items that are on the Security Council agenda, the EU has a role to play and to speak. So, going back to the original question, is the EU at the UN more than the sum of its membership? And that's my opinion, and I'm happy to have you debate it, but yes, the answer for me has to be a resounding yes. The EU is a major player at the GA, we have seen it, is maybe the major player in the GA. The EU delegation as a permanent presidency has ensured consistency, long-term planning, and continued process of lesson learning. One thing is if every 6 months you have a member state that has to come in, a lot of people coming to New York because the normal force of a mission cannot cope with the presidency responsibility, starting it up. Then you arrive at the end of your 6 months, everybody goes on holidays because they're completely tired after 6 months of presidency, and we start again. New priorities, new approach, lesson learned exercises, but they get lost because there's a limit of what you can do. We have created a structure that is permanent, is always there. We are always the presidency. And we are better at it than the member states could be, simply because we don't change, simply because we learn. And it's not that we learn by doing and we continue. Also, the EU delegation has become a single point of contact for all GA-related business. We are the face of the EU at the UN. If I remember when I was at the Italian mission before Lisbon Treaty, if one asked, but who's the face of the EU at the UN? Nobody would really say, yeah, there are those ambassadors that are better known than the others, but it was not the EU, because the EU was a small representation representing the European Commission, not really the European Union, and because the presidency changed every 6 months. So if the Italian ambassador or the French ambassador or the ambassador of Poland was for 6 months the president of the EU, he was still seen as the ambassador of Italy, the ambassador of Poland, the ambassador of France, because that was what he was all the time. Now, if you ask somebody in New York and say, who's the face of the EU, they will say it's Thomas Meyer-Harting, is the head of delegation. That is undeniable, in my opinion. And so the EU voice is clearly heard and perceived in the membership. There is a distinct European Union voice that is additional to that of the member states, that brings together that of the member states, but it is distinctively European. No single member state, we have already talked about that, but that is particularly true in the GA. No single member state, not even the US, would have the same clout that the EU has for its size, for its capacity of moving as a bloc. And we have already, it's the same discussion we have had before on the individual priority. We leverage the assets of the member states. But that also goes the other way. If you want to convince the Latin American about doing something, you have to use the particular relationship that Spain and Portugal have with them. In certain parts of Africa, France has a level of access that is unique. That is working as a system, and we are doing that. So it goes two ways. If you're a member state, you can magnify your clout by working with the European Union, but also from a European perspective, you have to use the assets of the member states to foster your common objectives. And while the resistance to our enhanced role continues, we have seen, through a pragmatic approach, we are, little by little, always broadening it. Security Council, we have seen, is a completely different setting. It's a completely different setting. It's dominated by the P5. It's driven by the P3. I was there when you enter the Security Council, even as, as Italy, not really a small state, a member of the G7, also a close ally of the United States, France, and UK. But when you enter the Security Council, you see that you're in a different world. In the GA, we are all equal, more or less. In the Security Council, there are those that are way more equal than the others, and that has an effect also on the EU. So the unique nature of it and the fact that we have 2 permanent members makes for a different EU role. But at the same time, we have become a consistent voice. in the Security Council. And there's no silver bullet. What I mean, we are not going to expand the role of the European Union all of a sudden in the Security Council. We are not going to have a European Union seat, but we have an inevitable growing influence by the fact, by being effective at what we do. So in one sentence, less than 5 years after the Lisbon Treaty, less than 4 years after the launch of the EEAS, and 3.5 years after the EU achieved enhanced status, I mean, this is important to my opinion. We are not talking about a process that has lasted 20 years. This is nothing for what we are trying to do. The EU has achieved, the EU is already impossible, absolutely impossible, in my opinion, also for somebody who's been there before. It's impossible for me to imagine the UN working again without the EU, a single EU voice brought forward by the EU delegation. I've been probably too long, so I don't know if we want to skip the last part, because the last part was on a first appraisal. And basically, I think we can also discuss that without my slides, but maybe in an interactive fashion. We have to quote Kissinger. I mean, we can't talk about this without quoting Kissinger. He said, I wanted to have the exact quote, so I did a little Google before.
What's the number for Europe?
Yes. And I found an article that was interesting because Kissinger saying, you know, I'm not really sure I've said this, but it's such a good quotation that I will say I have. Just to introduce the discussion, in my opinion, criticizing the European Union common foreign security policy is really a popular exercise. It's a little bit sometimes. I mean, you can criticize it. There is a lot of ground to criticize it. But sometimes, I've seen it really in the debate now in the Italian newspapers, when our foreign minister Mogherini was proposed as the next high representative. And you had this newspaper saying, but the high representative has no clout, has no role, we should have something else. I mean, it sounded sometimes like asking one of the candidates to Miss America about world peace. It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, but Europe, that doesn't exist, the high representative has no role. I think it manages both to underestimate and overestimate the EU common foreign security policy. But we don't have time to enter it, and maybe it's better to discuss it in a more interactive way. Thanks.